After completing this lesson, you will be able to understand project and shared coordinates and acquire coordinates. The objective domains covered are 5.4b, understand the concept of shared coordinates. Coordination between real-world coordinates and your Revit projects requires special attention. Getting this information wrong can be very costly and lengthen the project delivery times. In order to fully understand this subject, you must first understand each datum in Revit and its purpose. The project base point, by default, is positioned on top of the internal point and should remain clipped. There is a geometry limit of 20 miles around the project base point. The survey point should be placed at the origin of the coordinate system and remain at 0, 0, 0, or placed at a local survey station with the associated coordinates. The project base point should be located on a setting out point that can be clearly established out on site. For example, this may be the intersection of two grids. A site model is simply another Revit model that can contain one or more Revit models and other civil features such as drainage and topography. The structural model is linked into the coordinated site model and the coordinates are acquired and saved into your model. A link has now been established between the two Revit models. Go ahead and open up file 004, Uncoordinated Model. The model should open up in the site plan. Here we have a structural layout that's modelled from Revit's internal origin point. The internal origin point and the project base point will share the same location, which is the datum of Revit. It should have the coordinates by default of 0 for the north, 0 for the east, 0 for the elevation, and 0 for angle to true north. Our structural model has been located at our agreed setting out point, grids A1. At this particular point, we may not have any survey information to base the levels and position on. So we've established here that we're going to use a local setting out point, which is grid A1, and we're going to assume that the ground floor is in fact modelled at 0 feet. So if we open up the south elevation, you can see also the ground floor is situated at 0 feet. So our next task is to coordinate this model. In order to do this, we're going to need to link it into our site model. So this model will need to be closed down. So click File and then Close. You then go ahead and open up the file 004, understand the concept of shared coordinates. Our model opens up in the site plan. Before we start, let's review some of the documents that are linked into this model. Let's start with the AutoCAD drawing. So this AutoCAD drawing has come from the surveyor. It's been drawn in its real-world position and rotated to its real-world position. So the surveyor has prepared all of this information. You'll also note that the local setting out point has been marked on the survey. That information has been transferred across to our project base point. In this example, it was manually typed in, but you could also acquire the coordinates from the CAD model. The survey point has been positioned, in this case, to a known survey station with the correct coordinates. We also have a Revit topo surface included in the project. The topo surface has come from Civil 3D. So our next task here is to link in our structural project. On the Insert ribbon, select Link Revit. In the Import Link Revit dialog box, let's go ahead here and select 004 Uncoordinated Model. Do make sure that the positioning is set to Auto Origin to Origin. This will ensure that the two models are positioned on the internal origin. Let's go ahead and open that. So the only task for us to do now is to take our Revit model and rotate it to match the survey. To do this, let's select our linked Revit model. On the ribbon, we'll go ahead and click the Rotate command. Let's also make sure that we place the center of rotation at the base point. To do this, we can click Place on the options bar. I'm going to zoom right away in and then use the Tab key to make sure that I pick the point. Note in the status bar in the bottom left-hand corner of Revit, it now says Point, Site, Project Base Point. I click here. Then I need to define a position along grid A. So I'm going to pick a point over here somewhere. This is just an arbitrary point, but it must be on the grid. And to define a second point of rotation, we can pick the pink line representing grid A. So that's this pink line along here. And again, I can pick any arbitrary point along that as long as it's on that line. Our Revit model is now positioned. However, we still need to make sure that this has its correct elevation or Z height. To do this, we have a section here cut through the project base point called Structural Pad. Let's go ahead and open that section up. So here's our linked Revit model. This model now simply needs to be moved from the top of concrete here to the pad level. To do this, we can select the Move command. We can pick on the top of concrete. Note that the Constrain option is switched on the options bar. And what we'll then do is snap to the pad. In the project browser, let's open up the 3D view. And you can now note that our model is now coordinated and sitting at the correct level on our topo surface. So we're now going to go ahead and share the coordinates. Select your Revit model, and in the Properties palette, you'll notice here we have Shared Site. Currently, it's not shared. What we want to do is record the current position. If I click on Change, if I had different positions set up in the uncoordinated model, I could select those, but in this case, this is building A. If I click OK and OK again, I'll now need to save the model. Notice now I have the location position change dialog box. This is just recognizing that the shared coordinate system has been established, and now we're going to write some information back to the 004 uncoordinated model. Let's go ahead and click Save. And the model is now saved. To have a look at the results, we'll now close down our site file. And we'll now go back and open up the uncoordinated model. So the first thing we'll note is in the site plan, you can see now that our models are quite a long way apart. Let's open up the ground floor plan. And we can see here that there doesn't seem to be any rotation. However, in the properties of the view here, you'll notice that the orientation is currently set to Project North. Let's set this to True North. And you can now see the rotation matches the survey. If I place a spot coordinate down to confirm the location, on the Annotate ribbon, I can select Spot Coordinate. And you'll now notice that the coordinates match. Lastly, if I open up the south elevation and we review our levels, you'll note here that the ground floor level doesn't appear to have changed. However, if we select the level, in the Properties palette, select Edit Type, we can change the type properties here of the elevation base. You'll notice that the elevation base is set to the project base point. Let's go ahead there and change that to the survey point. Click OK to the type properties, and all of our levels update. Okay, so that confirms that our model is now coordinated.